Hello biology students. I want to do a quick recap today of the organelles. Hopefully you've completed your cell factory and turned that in. But I want to just kind of quick review with a concept map, and I want you to write this in your notes because I think this is really important. So, the main organelles that I want to talk about, and I want to talk about these as a function. So, cell organelles, ooh, I spelled this wrong. Organelles, there's an E in there, have a lot of different functions. And we're just going to do a quick concept map to kind of review those. Okay, so the main jobs that have to be done inside the cell, first of all, something has to control all those activities. Something has to make energy for the cell. Something has to kind of recycle things that get old in the cell. There has to be some manufacturing of things in the cell. And there has to be storage and transport. So, if we look at which organelles kind of do those different things, controls cell activities, I think most of you probably know. That's a job for the nucleus. And inside the nucleus we have DNA. That is actually the molecule that kind of controls directing those activities, if you will. It kind of contains the blueprint for everything that needs to be made within the cell. In terms of energy, the organelle that makes energy, so we can split this. So we have makes energy and captures energy. Makes energy the mitochondria, and captures energy, and this is true only of plant cells. Oops. Only of plant cells, and that is the chloroplast. Capture energy from the sun. Recycling, we have lysosomes. So those contain enzymes that break down things that are old or things that shouldn't be in the cells, like old organelles, or maybe defective organelles and those kinds of things. And then manufacturing, the main organelle that manufactures things is the ribosomes. So ribosomes make proteins. And obviously that's really, really important because we're made of mostly proteins. So the fact that proteins are made and used in different areas of the cell, but this is a really important job for the cell. And then the last part, storage and transport. So there's a few processes that have to happen. So storage and transport, so there has to be movement of materials. Super messy. So we have to both move materials around and we have to be able to package up materials because some of them are going to be exported out of the cell and they have to be in nice, neat little packages. So there's a couple of organelles that are really important. Moving things around, we talked about that endo or intercellular highway, if you will. That would be the ER, which we call the endoplasmic reticulum, and then packaging things up. Golgi bodies or Golgi apparatus, same thing. You'll see them either way. So the Golgi bodies are the packaging things up in those nice little vesicles, and then vesicles are the actual package. So I like this because it's, when you did your cell factory, you had to think about these functions, like where's the energy, coming from for your factory, and, manufacturing and storage and transport and moving things. So I think this, it's easy to look at this, I think, and maybe compare it to that cell factory. And then I want to jump right into talking about some of those processes that occur. So hopefully you watched the 2 videos yesterday, and it talked about the movement through the cell membrane and kind of osmosis and so forth. So I want to take some time right now to talk about that process, introduce some of those processes of movement through the cell membrane. So I want to talk about, first of all, I have just a simple, I'm going to see if I can step aside and maybe it's a better view. But I have this just a beaker of water with nothing in it. And if and I know this isn't the best, drop some food coloring in there, you can kind of see. So I've dropped my food coloring in, and I'm wiggling a little bit. But even if I were perfectly still, this food coloring begins to kind of dissolve and dissipate, if you will, through the water. I'm looking for where's the best background for you. And it's not really in that. It was at first, the water was very clear, and the only blue you could see was that big drop of food coloring. But as we watch this, we actually see all of the water is beginning to turn a little bit blue. And again, even if this was perfectly still, which it's not, and I'm trying not to drop it on my laptop, this is becoming light blue all over, and we see that there's not that dark blue clump of food coloring like there was when I first put it in here. That process is actually called diffusion, and it's due to random molecular motion of things moving from an area where they are more concentrated to an area where they're less concentrated. And this process actually occurs in our cells as well. So there's some things that can move by simple diffusion through the cell membrane without any energy use or anything like that. So that is one way that things move through the cell membrane. And we're going to talk about which things can move through the cell membrane that way and which things cannot. All right. So when things move through the cell membrane, some processes use energy and some processes do not use energy. So we're going to talk first of all about something called passive transport. Passive means that it doesn't require energy. So think in terms of people that you know. If we say someone's passive, what things come to mind about their personality? I would say they don't really get fired up about things. They kind of go with the flow, as opposed to someone who's active. So active transport, which we'll talk about after a bit, requires the use of energy. So someone who, and think of a personality or a person who's active. If someone who's active is like busy, they're using a lot of energy, and if we say they're just an active person in general, they just got a lot going on and they need a lot of energy to fuel their active lifestyle. So in cells, we also have active transport, things that move through the cell membrane that it just doesn't happen easily necessarily, and it requires some energy. So passive transport does not require energy. The one that we talked about already is diffusion. So this is a process by which molecules spread from an area where they're more concentrated, like my droplet of food coloring, to an area where there's less of that substance, like the food coloring. So it's diffusing, and in my beaker, this will continue to diffuse until this water, and it is almost there already just from sitting on my desk, it's an equal shade of blue pretty much throughout. I see a few swirls left of food coloring, but not very much. So that, and that will continue to diffuse through there. So there are some things that just diffuse in and out of the cell because there are areas where they're more concentrated and less concentrated. Nature does not like a concentration gradient. So it wants to get rid of, whoops, sorry, I see a dot right in the middle of my face. So nature wants everything to be equally distributed throughout. When we talked about states of matter a little earlier in the year, we talked about gases. So that happens in here. If somebody sprays some really smelly perfume in my classroom, initially maybe only the people directly around that person might smell it, but eventually everybody's going to smell the perfume because it's going to evenly distribute throughout the room until everybody kind of gets a whiff of it, if you know what I'm saying. So this has almost, so things that move through the cell membrane easily, a couple of examples of that are carbon dioxide and oxygen. So think about when you breathe in oxygen, right? So you take oxygen into your lungs. It's not because your lungs need oxygen. It's because your cells need oxygen. So when you breathe that oxygen in, it goes into your lungs, but then it diffuses through the cell membranes of some of those cells that are in your lungs, and then that oxygen attaches to those red blood cells, and then that oxygen is carried throughout the body and used up in cellular processes that we're going to talk about a little bit later, something called cellular respiration. So as that oxygen moves through the body, it gets used up in cellular respiration, carbon dioxide is produced, and then those same blood cells carry that carbon dioxide back to the lungs, where now there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the cells, there's a lot of oxygen in the air in the lungs, and that diffusion process occurs. Carbon dioxide will diffuse out, oxygen will diffuse in, until equilibrium is reached. That's when the concentration is equal in the case of our cells, on both sides of that cellular membrane. Nature doesn't like a concentration gradient. So a concentration gradient is just like I said, when I dropped my food coloring in here, at first we saw this big drop of blue food coloring. There was a concentration gradient. It eventually diffused throughout. So again, we say that the cell membrane is semi-permeable. Let me move this so you can see. Semi-permeable, it only allows certain things to pass through. Some things pass through just by diffusion, but a lot of things can't. So we'll talk more about those. Like we'll talk about osmosis and active transport in the next lesson.